So this is part B of the KhoodeelaarTV campaign World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street, the London-based main newspapers. So this is the Daily Star, which is running a picture of Stanley Johnson. It seems that Stanley Johnson is featuring in two tabloid papers today, Sunday. One is this one, his latest disrespect to society. Forget about the fact that he is related to Boris Johnson. He's the biological father of Boris Johnson. And he is on the record, or records, as having expressed more than once even more racist opinions and more hateful opinions about the targets of Boris Johnson's own racist kind of attacks than Boris Johnson himself. Stanley Johnson, together with his daughter, Rachel Johnson, notoriously intervened as post facto, that is after the event, supporters in the propaganda campaign to justify Boris Johnson's attack on Muslim women wearing the headgear and comparing the Muslim women wearing headgear as resembling or looking like bank robbers. Now, even Boris Johnson is now looking like bank robber because he is wearing mask on his face, which was the main focus of the attack on the Muslim women because their faces were covered. Now, even Boris Johnson and his mentor, Donald Trump, is wearing face coverings resembling bank robbers. So to focus on Stanley Johnson with evidence that he is disregarding the requirement to wear face mask is ironic on several levels, because that shows that when he said that Boris Johnson's attack on the Muslim women had not been severe enough, he meant that the headgearing or the head covers and the masks that they wear or wore were justifiable grounds and targets for attacking them because they did look like or resembled bank robbers. And he is now being condemned for not looking like a bank robber. So the expectation in society is that everyone should look like a bank robber to save everyone else's health and lives in many cases. So everyone should look like a bank robber, and no one more so than this racist, hate-spewing, anti-Muslim moron, Stanley Johnson, who said that the racist spewing by Boris Johnson against Muslim women had not gone far enough. Now he is being condemned for not doing his duty to look like a bank robber. So that is the Daily Star on Sunday. We'll come to the Mail on Sunday in a little while, in this edition, hopefully. And the Daily Star has no option but to run this particular kind of pun on the sickness, on the term sickness. How sick is Trump? Confusion. That is what they are running. So both liars and deniers, Trump and Johnson, are in real bodha, real mess of their own making, real mess of their dishonesty and their own dishonest racist making. Because denying social responsibility comes from the same mindset that denies equality and dignity and respect to people based on their faith, their ethnicity, their culture, their nationality, their origin. And that kind of racism and hate spewing is shared by Trump and Johnson, or rather, is shared by Trump and the Johnsons. I'm looking for the piece, the extended piece on Stanley Johnson on the inside pages of the Star on Sun. This pages 4 and 5. So where are the pages 4 and 5? That is it. So that's the one. So he is being featured on the same kind of 2 pages, and underneath this one, that's where he is, Stanley Johnson. And it is a sober, it should be a sober vindication of all the people who observed the crass behavior of Stanley Johnson when he joined his daughter, Rachel Johnson, and almost in a synchronized, robotic, insensitive, stupid, offensive, racist way, they chorused as if, because they didn't appear on the television footage, doing the same by standing next to one another. But it could be arranged technically. They said that Boris Johnson's attack on Muslim women had not gone far enough. And here is this moron, for the 10th time perhaps, since his son, biological son, became, quote, lead item or lead member of the Conservative Party in an embarrassing situation, as Anne Ashworth, who was until very recently on the staff of the Murdoch Times newspapers, told Ben Brown on BBC News Channel between 8 and 9 GMT today, Sunday the 4th of October 2020, while she was doing the so-called press review or newspaper review, a kind of fake, false, and artificial version of what we are doing. We are doing the original diagnostic analysis of the liars, the Fleet Street papers. She pointed out that Stanley Johnson was doing no favors to Boris Johnson by being caught appearing in this kind of positions. And she remarked on the fact that the wearing of the face mask was completely wrong. And she critically remarked about everyone else who did that without properly covering the nose and the mouth with the cover. And this story, this copy, actually is followed by his editorial bit on the Daily Star Sunday on page 6, which we shall be looking at in a minute. But it is written by Isabel Dickinson, chief reporter of the Daily Star on Sunday. So Boris Johnson's dad has been caught flouting coronavirus rules for a second time. That's not true. It has been any number of times, much more than the second time. The Prime Minister's father, Stanley, was spotted with a mask down as he read a book in a busy airport. Our exclusive picture shows the 80-year-old waiting to board a flight in Athens. It came just days before he was caught shopping without a mask near his home in London earlier this week. Last night, the I'm a Celebrity star told us, "I'm extremely sorry, the mask appears to have slipped. I certainly wore it properly in the plane. I'm definitely going to take extra care now, inside or out." With reference to our photo, he added, "I was following all the rules on social distancing. As you can see, there are big spaces both to the left and the right of me. But officials in Greece have threatened any and all necessary action against anyone found breaking rules." The incident happened last Sunday as Stanley headed back to the UK after 3 weeks at his Greek villa. Local law says masks must be worn at all times in all public spaces. Anyone breaking the rule risks a fine of around £135. A police source told us, "It does not matter who you are, celebrity or no. We are all doing our best to stop the virus spreading, and we will be very hard on those who do not listen." And it goes on, but we shall look at the editorial so-called comment, and then we shall add our comment. Rules are for all, PM. Boris Johnson had the cheek to blame the rise in COVID cases on the public becoming blasé. So they are focusing on Boris Johnson before they comment on his father. But let's see what the rest of it says. It says, "This would make sense if the public had any responsibility for the confusing and wishy-washy policies. Now that is the wrong word, policies. It actually should be policies, shouldn't it? So read again. This would make sense if the public had any responsibility for the confusing and wishy-washy policies imposed by his circus of a government. So it is not a government, it's a circus. But that is Boris's fault and the fault of his advisor, Dominic Cummings, who blatantly broke lockdown rules and yet faced no punishment. How can you expect people to take rules seriously if they are ignored by the people in charge? Do these guys think they are above the law? Former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was caught dining with at least 7 other people despite the rule of 6. And Boris's own dad was snapped shopping without a mask this week. He apologized and claimed he didn't know the rules. Well, as we exclusively show today, he completely disregarded the rules in Greece too. If the Prime Minister's own family won't listen to him or cannot understand the rules, then why should he, that is Boris Johnson, expect the rest of the country to do so? Boris Johnson should set an example and denounce his father's attitude and take responsibility for this crisis, and the public will follow. Now, I have obviously not repeated there him and other PM. I have called his name. I really do not agree with Boris Johnson being called PM or Prime Minister because he's totally unfit and he doesn't deserve to be given any even kind of passing level as Prime Minister. So what is happening with the Stanley Johnson lies is that he has got this villa in Greece and he has been photographed without any mask in Greece before. That the Daily Star on Sunday has failed to mention, and many other things they have failed to mention. And the worst thing that they have failed to mention, or the worst thing by them, is their failure to mention, or their intentional choice or the decision to not mention the fact that he and Boris Johnson and the other one, Rachel Johnson, they have got untenably long history of racist and lying utterances. And as is evident on the records, as soon as Boris Johnson became the occupant at the post of mayor at the expense of London in May 2008, all of a sudden, there was this surprise appearance of a person called Rachel Johnson, who claimed to be his sister. And it is actually kind of a verifiable fact that he is biologically related to her. But until that time, until that period, let's say following the great London mayoral miselection of 2008, I had not noticed that person, nor had I seen any mention of her being related to Boris Johnson until sometime into May 2008. So it's clearly more than a coincidence. It was a plot by her to surface. And it later emerged, not long after that, but it soon emerged, that Boris Johnson, was putting many of his relations or many of the people he was related to in positions after he got into the post as mayor at the expense of London. So this is brazen corruption. It's not ignorance of the rules or the requirements, but it's brazen corruption and defiance. And the blame lies with the tabloids and the media, allowing Johnson to get away with this kind of thing without criticizing or scrutinizing his illegality and unlawful behavior and antisocial behavior and his spiteful disregard of the duties that he otherwise says everyone else is kind of obliged to follow. So the diagnosis of Fleet Street includes this bit that I have just said, that the papers have been willfully negligent and in fact complicit in allowing Boris Johnson to flout the laws and the rules and to expose the country and society and millions of people to disadvantage and risks. Now, the Observer is actually peddling the bourgeois kind of thing in the magazine, Observer magazine. And there is a Woodland Trust supplement, which is the only thing that can be tolerated and accepted. And don't mind putting this advertisement there, Woodland Trust, all these squirrels and the animals. That's the only acceptable thing about this supplement. And the rest of it is bourgeois. And completely ignorant. Blue sky thinkers and the pretense that they know or care about the differences in income and wealth between people. And they've got a thing on the TB life, which, as I said in part A, is based on the capital of the woman's body, and it's another woman with a hair that looks like blonde. And they don't leave anything to the imagination. They say what she allegedly thinks or feels. So that is the kind of complete fantasy land that they create. And this one is this is the Observer Review, dated the 4th of October 2020. And they're devoting this one to Hilary Mantel. Now, the excuse that she has in her favor is that she has been on the record as making quite a few remarks, whether they were intended to increase her circulation of her books, but she has made a number of remarks that were critical. Let's put it this way, which is not something that can be said about most, quote, British or English, quote, writers. And they've got a piece about John Cusack, an actor who's talking about his faltering career, a frank interview. When will the Observer actually run stories from the grassroots, from the ordinary people's lives and the struggles that people have against poverty, discrimination, racism, and about the campaigns that are completely suppressed, campaigns against various wrong behavior by the local councils and their equivalents, about issues that affect people's day-to-day lives. Of course, the presumption is that the Observer and the rest of Fleet Street lives on a planet that is not real. So therefore, there is nothing about Bangladesh, for example, or about the kind of significant compared to the rest of the events, rest of the rapes, significant awareness that has been expressed in Bangladesh after the ruling Awami League aligned student league gangs or gangsters raped this 19-year-old woman in the Sylhet MC College on 25th of September 2020. And if the observer doesn't identify that kind of incident and the uproar that is sweeping Bangladesh, at least temporarily, but it is something that is noticeably happening, then how are they helping countries like Bangladesh become accountable and safe places for women? And if the countries like Bangladesh are allowed to fester in lack of due process and lack of accountability and lack of safety for women in this context, how can so many people who are seeking escape from countries like Bangladesh, how can they be helped to stay in their country in the knowledge that they would be safe and secure and well looked after? And that is the racist, crass racist agenda followed by the observer. Makes no difference whether it is aligned with the Guardian or not. In fact, the Guardian is as racist as the Daily Mail in the agenda, in the narrative. And the acres of space being given to Trump's alleged kind of exposure to the virus shows the contempt the observer has for the world. There is a piece about the 1930s and the gay British MPs who gave early warning of Nazi threat. And it is byline to somebody called Noshin Iqbal, which is definitely a Pakistan-related or Pakistan-linked or Urdu-related name, which is rare. And the rest of the observer's coverage that includes one piece on page 9 by their science editor saying that cases among staff in London care homes and hospitals soaring, the cases of the virus spreading. So there is going to be yet another bleak season. And there is this one about the infection rules forcing 20% of special needs pupils to miss school. Now, what is absolutely unforgivably dominant in the British press, Fleet Street, as well as in their kind of counterparts in the USA, and come to that in the other kind of parts of the British colonial kind of bloc, New Zealand and Australia and Canada and parts of South Africa. These so-called media, mainstream media, as I have been identifying, are the zombifiers of the gullibles. And in all these territories, the majority of the people who consume these outlets or output or the products behave in effect as the gullibles. They don't think and they don't critically think. and they don't look for the evidence. And it is not a coincidence that Tony Abbott, the Australian so-called ex-politician, is now, in fact, as powerful, as influential as Dominic Cummings is in the cabal fronted by Boris Johnson. And the news during the week that Priti Patel was plotting on to condemn asylum seekers to the kind of offshore, middle of the ocean locations where they would be consigned, which has been trialed and implemented by Australia more than any other country. And he's now, this Tony Abbott is saying that these policies will be of interest to Britain or in Britain's interest. What is Britain's interest? Who are the people that constitute Britain? He does not, Tony Abbott, a racist liar, obviously does not include most people in that conception of Britain. He includes the very small number of criminals that are in control of the big business decisions and the agenda of the so-called government. Most people are let down. Most people are not being served properly, regardless of their race and ethnicity. But the likes of Abbott, of course, are thinking in a racist kind of expectation that the majority of the gullibles will expect their kind of definition to reflect only the white ones. No country in the world today can function in the way that the white exclusivist and white supremacist and the racists want the populations to be made of only white people. That cannot happen. There are various practical difficulties. For a start, the demographic of the world is that the white population is very significantly less than the other people, African people, Asian people. And if the resources of Africa and Asia are stopped from reaching Western Europe, then Western Europe would be starving. Now, this is fact. And so when I say that Boris Johnson is a racist liar, I don't say that kind of lightly. I say that his racist stupidity is exposing to serious risk, existential risk, most people in this country. And most people are white people in this country. So I'm speaking in the long run and practically for the benefits and the very existence of the majority of these people who are at risk from Boris Johnson's racism and his family's racism and stupidity. And there is this piece about, it's very, very significant. Justine Greening is being described as a former Secretary of State for Education. And the piece by her, or at least the piece byline to her, is headlined, "We Tories must ditch elitism and embrace true equality." That is like Tower Hamlets' mayor, John Biggs, talking about Ian Devlin and calling him not by name and describing him as a party to manslaughter of Shibli Rahman. Shibli Rahman was not Man slaughtered, you moron. Shibli Rahman was murdered by racists. And the legal position is that unless that conviction of racist murder was overturned or rebranded, that conviction and the term and the definition of Shibli Rahman's murder by racists stands. And Ian Devlin, one of the convicted killers of Shibli Rahman, was encouraged to file an appeal against his being called racist. But even if he did file that appeal, the judge who heard his appeal did not overturn the original sentence, original conviction of the murderers as racistly motivated murderers. And even in 2016, many years since the racist killer, Ian Devlin, was encouraged to file that bogus appeal, Ted Jury, one of the racists who has been feeding off the Bangladeshis for a long time, and he is feeding off the Bangladeshis even more nefariously now than he had done before he got into some intimate contracts, opportunistic contracts with one or two Bangladeshis in a very close way. Even Ted Jury had to admit, because the evidence exists only to compel such admission, that Ian Devlin was a racist killer. Now, he may not be one of the ones convicted of racist murder, but he was convicted of the racistly motivated killing of the person who was the victim of the racist murder and the killing. And he, Ian Devlin, remains convicted criminal. And he was convicted of being involved in the killing. So, in effect, he aided and abetted the racist murderers. Hope this is clear to the racist John Biggs and any other racist who denies that Ian Devlin was a racist, convicted racist killer, and he remains on the record as convicted racist killer. He may have entered a kind of pretense kind of plea that he didn't know and he didn't have any racist feeling. What on earth was he doing then? When the murderers and the killers were heard to tell their victim, "Shut up, you pucky." This is the quote from the Independent online, where Ted Jury got a byline about this. Whoever gave the information to Ted Jury about Ian Devlin has the basic duty to come forward and say why they gave the information to Ted Jury and that did not follow up the obligation and the duty to take it to the logical step to have the racist Claire Lillis removed from that position and to have that school properly overturned and properly reformed and properly reorganized. And why did the racists, who included Chris Weavers, Danny Hussle, to name only two, but there are several other members of the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets who were involved at various stages as governors of that same racistly run school. Those racists still owe the basic obligation to apologize to the victim's family and to apologize to the community for their role and the denial and the complicity at various stages in keeping Claire Lilies in place and being allowed, Claire Lilies being allowed to be left alone without her racist role being exposed and fully held against her. So this is a update today, but it will be further updated in later times. So we've got a list of racists who, after the event, Boris Johnson's language, post facto, after the facts, constructed a series of alibis and excuses to let Claire Lilies get away, to let Ian Devlin be painted as not being racist. If he was not a racist, what was he doing with the racists murdering the victim? That question has to be answered. And the criminals, not involved in that crime, but the criminals in pursuing their careers and abusing the fact of the scandal, who organized this bogus meeting, so-called protest meeting, in the middle of June 2016 at the Greater Haque Street-based micro business center, so-called, who gave the racist denier John Biggs a bigger platform than they did to any campaigner against racism at that meeting. Those criminals will go down as colluders with racists, despite the fact that they staged that bogus meeting. Every single one knows who they are, these criminals, as well as the ones that tried to sit very close to the racist denier John Biggs at that meeting. They had no right to call that meeting and sabotage a genuine campaign that should have been supported and taken to the logical conclusion by having both Lilies and Devlin properly held to account, and also by seeing John Biggs removed after his racist collusion with the Lilies and Devlin kind of denials, removed from the post of so-called elected mayor at the expense of Tower Hamlets. Elected mayor at the expense of Tower Hamlets, that is. Not removed at the expense of the community. He should have been removed in July 2020 when he gave the racistly denying spiel at the so-called full meeting of the council. And those liars who said that they would be presenting a petition against the whole Ian Devlin, Claire Lilies, Ian Mikado School criminality after the original murders, those liars, all the Bangladeshi liars, are to blame for sabotaging and making a false statement that they would be presenting the petition to the council. There was no petition presented to the council. And those liars lied to me. And those liars were shamelessly trying to ingratiate themselves physically with the diminutive John Biggs when he came out. They should be ashamed of themselves. Those liars included councillors and so-called community activists, disgraceful colluders and mental slaves. And they have done nothing but add serious grief to the family of the victim of the racist murder. And by extrapolation, they have added to the unwarranted justification and glee felt by the racist criminals, whether they're directly involved in the racist crimes or as excusers and colluders of the racist criminals after the event or after the series of events. This week we have been talking about the case of the First Nation or the original nation young mom in her 30s who died in a hospital in Canada. And when she was dying, the nurses in the hospital, so-called nurses in the so-called hospital in Canada were taunting her. Instead of caring for her, instead of helping her, instead of comforting her, they were taunting her, they were insulting her, and they were laughing at her state. And they were blaming her for being ill. That is Justin Trudeau's disgrace. Trudeau was unmasked a couple of years ago as having done his own racist kind of pretensions. But it's not Trudeau alone. Trudeau, the trendy boy, has been allowing serial racists to indulge in serial racist activities and violence and contempt, culminating so far in the racist nurses taunting instead of caring for a dying patient and racistly slurring her and mocking her. When Brenda, the British monarch, reportedly praised Justin Trudeau, apparently for his youth and youthfulness, did Brenda realize that she, as the monarch, who is still the head of the state of Canada, has the duty to make sure that it is not functioning as a racist state? This is the question for Brenda, Queen Elizabeth II. And anyone, absolutely anyone, who is so stupid as to feel that Brenda doesn't have enough monuments and structures and public spaces named after her should be prosecuted for false pretense. And I include Boris Johnson for misnaming the already wrongly kind of installed Crossrail as Queen Elizabeth Line and misnaming the Stratford Olympic Stadium as Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. How dare this moron think that Brenda needs anything else to be named after her? That is proof of the entire population being treated as the gullibles. So back to the gullibility makers, newspapers so-called, who are responsible for the parades and lines of making people gullible. And this Observer policy editor, Michael Savage, tries to be savage in his criticism of Johnson, but he doesn't succeed. He is a kind of jobbing policy editor who doesn't have the courage or the guts or the intelligence or the moral integrity to be really rigorously critical on the evidence, critical of the likes of Johnson. And that is what I would say about her, his former fan, Justin Greening. We are on the record. The Khoodeelaar campaign is on the record as having condemned Justin Greening as being a robotic praiser of Boris Johnson. I mean, she was one of the Boris Johnson fans at the time when Boris Johnson's image was being built furiously by conservatives lying for this liar. Everything that is said in this Michael Savage piece is a rehash of things that have been known. That he's unfit, he's dishonest, he has no understanding of things, how to run, let alone run the government. So why has it taken Justine Greening years before she comes out for the Tories needing to be ditching elitism and embrace true equality? What does she mean by true equality? She doesn't mean end of racism in the Conservative Party. So she is being artificial and she's floating on the opportunistic moment when the lies about Johnson that she peddled are now seen for the lies that they were always. And she doesn't actually condemn Johnson even now. The Observer is still written by elitist bourgeois liars. Every Observer name that is permanently there is the name of an elitist and a liar and a racist. And I cannot even name them all because it is sick-making. And the two-page focus given to Keir Starmer is headlined, "We have a mountain to climb." After his first 6 months as leader, Starmer knows Labour is still in the foothills of electoral recovery. Can he keep his party onside, while convincing the public that it has changed? Interview by Andrew Ronsley and Tobias. Now, Andrew Ronsley is a sickness. Andrew Ronsley is a sickness that is comparable to the likes of Richard Littlejohn on the Daily Mail now. Here is a correction. Richard Littlejohn used to be on the Sun, and earlier in the last 2 days I have described him as a Sun columnist. It appears that he is now on the Daily Mail, but he hasn't changed his narrative, his racism at all. He's the same, peddling the same racist lies and denials. So Richard Littlejohn and Andrew Ronsley on the Observer are similar. The only difference is that Ronsley, spends a bit more time in craftily disguising his racism and his stupidity and his opportunism. And because the Observer would not run his column and would not give him the space if it got caught peddling and promoting and platforming a racist like him. And the Observer got a piece about Trump's exposure to the virus, and the headline is, "It's a code red moment for the US. Will its foes now take advantage?" It's written by Simon Tisdale. Now, who are the foes of the US? There is no such thing as the US. US is many countries divided into many sects and sectors and groups, and it's a battleground. And the Democratic Party has never been democratic, not anywhere near democratic, let alone for democracy, let alone for changing the disequilibrium and disparities. So the mythology of the USA as a unified country or one society is a criminal, intentionally conceived lie. And the lie includes the silence about the huge, deadly arsenal that Trump has been boasting of having added to. Can you imagine? The nuclear, the amount of arsenal that exists in the USA's possession and control can destroy this planet 1,000 times over. And the picture of Trump published in the British press as carrying the nuclear button as he goes to hospital is chilling beyond words. And there is no comment about any of that in the British papers, in the Fleet Street papers. And the week ended, or it just within 10 days, let's say, 9 days, because September was 30 days. So this is 6 and 4, 10 days. The last 10 days, the United Nations marked the 75th anniversary. And the preacher man, who is the Secretary General, Anthony Guterres, has routinely posted his preachery tweets and lines that the only way to stop nuclear conflagration, he hasn't used the word conflagration, but he has meant it, is to ban and stop nuclear arsenals. But that's just a token kind of thing. There has been no decision, no discussion about banning or discouraging or holding to account the nuclear arsenal owners and controllers. So this is the agenda that threatens the very existence, physical existence of the whole planet, is being run by the military industrial complex and other criminals based, all of them, mainly based in the USA. And the papers, the UK papers, are as content to let that continue as the American ones are, as the rest of the members of the Security Council of the UN are. In fact, all the members of the United Nations, member states as represented by governments, not by the people. So the definition of the United Nations has been allowed to remain unupdated, if you like. So the Daily Mirror, the Sunday Mirror, is the only one that is kind of putting it bluntly that Trump has said, will he die? I mean, that shows that there is a genuine possibility that Trump is ill. I said in the earlier ones that it is also possible, because of his defiance, that it may be a fake staged to get him elected again. And one of the other pieces that has appeared in one of the Sunday papers is that, John Sopel, the BBC's man in the USA, is ignorantly, typically, John Sopel is a racist idiot. And he's not the only racist idiot. Most of the BBC's front men and women are racist and ignorant. The Sopel is mostly kind of wrong on his behavior, despite the fact that early on, when Trump took over as the occupant of the White House in 2016, he targeted Sopel at a news conference and scolded him. But the BBC decided to leave Sopel there. And Sopel is ignorant, typical of the BBC's racists. And their perspective is always based on the assumption that it's a white world. The world is not white, but the power levers are held by criminals who are white. That does not include most white people. But the criminals who hold the levers of power in strategic positions, including business, as in the military industrial complex, are white, and they actually de facto practitioners of the ideals of white supremacy. Remember, this world exclusive diagnosis coming to you from the Khoodeelaar campaign in London's East End. And we are covering the inadequacies and the denials of the entire mainstream media. And we are saying that the headline that Trump was kind of praising the white supremacists, these are themselves white supremacists lies, because white supremacy rules the decision-making considerations of the USA, the UK, Germany, France, Sweden, Belgium, Holland, Australia, and even New Zealand, despite the particular kind of behavior after the massacres in the mosques, behavior by the current Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who was generously complimented by Muslims, most of the country's Muslims and other people. But New Zealand is another racist society, and the racists inhabited society. We shall be talking about a particular New Zealand racist who was operating in Brick Lane and who has returned to New Zealand in the last few years. We shall dedicate a whole edition or more to the facts and the evidence of that particular racist. And she could not be more unlike the public persona created by Jacinda Ardern in the years since the massacres of the Muslims in the two mosques in New Zealand. So what we are saying in this world exclusive diagnosis of the media is not just going through the headlines. We're actually examining the depth of the denials and the lies that they carry and they represent, and also the inadequacies and the lies about the basic kind of rules of democracy, so-called, as they claimed, even to the extent of their claimed levels of democracy. So this headline, as I said, is that what putting up there. I mean, who could imagine even a week ago that Trump, who has been in persistent denial of the virus for all these times, for months, nearly a year now, coming to a year now almost, short of 3 months, that he would be reportedly saying, will he die? I mean, he was contemptuous of the advice to do the basic covering of faces. And he and his mob were all meeting, dozens of meetings, and dozens of them together without any safety, wearing the mask and so forth. And they're saying here that the next 48 hours, well, obviously the next 48 hours is almost over. They're saying that this period will be critical. And they're focusing on the surface. They're not focusing on the truth of the society in the USA. And that is the defect, that is the failure of the Mirror on Sunday, as well as of the rest of the Fleet Street paper. The Mirror is less kind of guilty of racism, but only slightly less guilty than the so-called circulation rivals. They're not ethical rivals or moral rivals, but circulation rivals, which is far less important than ethical and moral rivalry that doesn't exist in this country. And the same thing is the case with Keir Starmer with the Tories. He is a Tory man. He doesn't have any moral or ethical objections to the Tories. Keir Starmer is a racist denier. And those people who, in his constituency, kind of grin and stand for selfies with him should understand that is a stunt, serial stunt, racists like Starmer stage for consumption by the constituency morons. They should look at his record. They should examine his utterances, and they should demand answers from him truthfully, which they don't do. Same case with other MPs and constituents. So that is the deadly deficit. That is deficit that is denying democracy and democratic accountability. When it comes to people being exposed to deadly risks, democracy becomes much more than a slogan. And that is what we have to look at. Is democracy being churned out as just a slogan? And the answer is yes. If the contents of the papers, the contents of the media, and the way that Andrew Marr allowed Johnson, yet another platform, to lie and spew denials and idiocies, confirms that the BBC is now doesn't even have any pretense to be objective. It's become the most authentic house platform, house broadcaster for the right-wing racist, resurgent racist conservatives in Britain. So we shall be continuing because the contents warrant a continuation of this, and we shall be covering as updates and our commentary on the situation in Bangladesh, about which we say stop rape in Bangladesh and rapists must not live in Bangladesh. And we are not impressed by the behavior of the English language immoral elements that are publishing the so-called updates in Bangladesh today.